basically our guilt or innocence or whatever was hanging on whatever happened in this room.
In 2000, the Ramseys were free and clear. The grand jury had failed to find sufficient evidence to indict them. Well, or so everyone thought in 2000. And the Ramseys were doing their victory lap. You might call it damage control or reputational management, but whatever it was, the Ramseys ought to have been confident and concise by 2000 of exactly what happened and when it happened and what their position was on what happened. I mean, they were on Larry King to do PR for their book. They'd written the book. And yet, as you're about to see, Larry King just asking a few extremely simple and obvious questions caused some tricksy moments for both John and Patsy. In this analysis, we'll look at 5 slips that occurred in the first 5 minutes of Larry King Live, the interview from 2000.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, without any further ado, let's jump right into these 5 slips. Number 1, will you take a lie detector test? Less than 1 minute into the interview, Larry asked one of those beautiful, simple questions.
You had said recently in an interview that you were willing to take a lie detector test, and apparently the Boulder police are now saying, let's set it up. Will you do it?
Well, it's fascinating that 3 years after the incident, they still hadn't taken a lie detector test, and the only reason they did wasn't because the cops asked them, and the cops had spoken to them about it. I mean, they were asking them now. But did you know that Steve Thomas brought up the topic at the end of the 1997 interview with Patsy? Here's an excerpt. This is Steve Thomas talking. Hypothetically, Patsy, if you took a polygraph, how would you do? Patsy Ramsey, I'm telling you the truth. I would. I mean, I don't know how these things work, but if they tell the truth, I'm telling the truth. We never ever given anybody a reason to think otherwise. I want to find out who did this, period. Steve Thomas, does that mean yes and you'd pass it? I think he's asking, yes, you would do it and you'd pass it. Patsy, yes, I would pass it. I'll take 10 of them. I don't care, do whatever you want. That was in 1997, and the Ramseys didn't take a polygraph then, or the next year, or for the next 3 years. So it wasn't because the police asked or mentioned it or brought it up, but because Barbara Walters asked them.
Why didn't you take a lie detector test?
No one ever asked us
Really?
to take a lie detector test.
Police never asked you to take a lie detector test?
No.
Well, almost immediately after saying that on national television, the police did ask them, and this was Larry King basically conveying that message to them at the beginning of this interview. So they were asked to do one, and the headlines really say the rest. Polygraph talks ongoing. Attorney for John and Patsy Ramsey threatened to sue ex-detective. That's from April 2000. Ramseys reject lie detector tests for now, April 2000. Ramseys try again and pass lie test, May 2000. John and Patsy Ramsey press conference regarding polygraphs, May 24th. I think this is from Fox News. Experts lie test doesn't fully exonerate Ramseys, May 2001. But let's deal with how John answers the question on Larry King in 2000. He's asked, will you do it? Now, notice how John starts off by looking down, and he seems to nod when he says no and shakes his head slightly when he says yes. It's also interesting that he doesn't simply answer a simple yes or no question, will you do it, with the word yes.
Will you do it?
We were asked, had we been asked to take a lie detector test? We said no. We were asked, would we? We said certainly we would.
We've got 4 of these, almost like what the F's to get through. We've dealt with the first one. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Welcome to the many of you who have subscribed. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, enjoyable, meaningful, interesting, any of those, and you haven't yet hit the thanks button, please consider doing so. If you're not getting notifications and you want to be alerted to videos being published, you can also follow me on X. I also share the links to videos whenever I publish them on X, so you can also follow me there. And let's get started. So, number 2, will you let the FBI conduct it? In other words, will you let the FBI do the polygraph? And what do you think the answer is to that? What do you think the answer ultimately was? The answer was no. We're not going to let the FBI conduct it. Larry doesn't ask that question in so many words. He simply suggests the FBI to Patsy. And how does Patsy respond to that suggestion? Well, she responds by not responding.
And then you would take, well, by fair, what's the determination of that, Patsy?
Well, I think it has to be someone of
National repute?
national repute,
FBI man?
independent, a professional polygrapher.
You notice there's quite a bit of head shaking from Patsy. Let me ask you the viewer, a simple question. Do you think John and Patsy wanted to be polygraphed? In any event, they took the test, passed, and then held a press conference. Now, let's just take a quick glimpse into some additional backstory around this. We are going to come back to Larry King, but on May 24th, around a month after this interview with Larry King, for those who think Patsy's the kind of woman who normally wouldn't shower and it was normal for her not to take a shower and would travel with clothes in plastic bags. I saw some people making a comment in the last video that they would think, well, this is just normal behavior for Patsy Ramsey. Then I'm not sure if you know Patsy very well. Not sure if you've studied her in enough detail. Just have a look at how she presents herself at a simple press conference dealing with their polygraph tests.
I wish they would open their eyes and their minds and their hearts and know that we did not kill our daughter and that a killer walks the streets of this country, and we need to be looking for that person. As long as there is a killer at large who has murdered our child, our lives will never go on.
Does she look like the sort of woman who would wear the same outfit twice and would wake up in the morning and put on clothes that she was wearing the night before? Perhaps wear sweats to an interview. Then there's also this reaction from former FBI profiler Greg McCreary, and I think it's from the Boulder Daily Camera. It's basically someone from the FBI reacting to the Ramseys taking this polygraph. McCreary said that polygraphs can be a valuable investigative tool, but they need to be looked at in the context of the entire case. McCreary questioned how thorough the Ramseys examiners could be without having the depth of knowledge about the case that an FBI examiner would have access to. And if you're not sure what that's about, what he's talking about, just think about the CBI doing the lie detector with Chris Watts. I mean, he said his mind was melting. They went into so much detail. They sort of tied him up into knots, and that did go on for hours. And so McCreary said there have to be many questions. He said you need to probe a little more than that. And then their lawyer said that FBI polygraph exams can lead to interrogations that last for hours. Well, what would be wrong with that? McCreary said the couple could only benefit from passing an FBI test. So an FBI test is basically pretty rigorous. And so another test is probably less rigorous. Well, which test do you think they took? And so McCreary said, if there's nothing to hide, I don't know what their reluctance is. And I think at the end of the day, the Ramseys chose the polygrapher. It was a polygrapher of their own choosing. It wasn't someone that was independently allocated. Even though they talk about an independent person, I think they selected who they wanted to be polygraphed by. I'm saying this under correction. Anyway, knowing what we know now about the indictments, 3 questions that I guess could have been asked in a polygraph setting include, were any of the Ramsey children neglected? Was bedwetting a serious problem? Did you render aid to anyone at the crime scene? Or what about, Patsy, did you write the ransom note? Well, guess what? Patsy was actually asked that question.
Did you write the ransom note that was found in your house? Answer, no. Regarding the ransom note, did you write it? Answer, no. Is that your handwriting on the ransom note found in your house? Answer, no. Conclusion. Patsy Ramsey was telling the truth
Why did the Ramseys...
Quite an interesting little lick of the lips Patsy makes as the polygrapher basically confirms that she was telling the truth about not writing the ransom note. Must have been a pretty good moment for Patsy. But missing from the fine print is the fact that the Ramseys didn't ace the first lie detector test, which came back inconclusive. Did you know that? JonBenet Ramsey's parents passed a lie detector test given by a private expert after the first one they took came up inconclusive, their lawyer announced yesterday.
What? I knew it!
Right, so let's get back to Larry's interview. And that brings us to number 3. Patsy responds to the idea of the Ramseys being suspects. So just think about what we're talking about here. Just think about how ironic this is. A few seconds after talking about how willing they are to take a polygraph and this whole idea of we are not lying, we are telling the truth, etc. Larry asks Patsy about how, as suspects, they got through the tragic death of their own child.
The suspect as well. How do you get through that?
Well, first of all, we have never been deemed suspects.
Yeah, but the public regards you.
We've been said to be under the umbrella of suspicion, whatever that means.
Patsy has a big smile on her face as she says this. I have to wonder, why are they on Larry King to begin with, promoting a book titled Death of Innocence? It seems to be about the death of their innocence because they were thought to be suspects, not the death of their innocent child. I also wonder if they were polygraphed on the question, were you ever considered suspects by the police? How would they answer? Also, why did the Ramseys lawyer up? I mean, a lawyer for Patsy, a different one for John, and another one for Burke. Why would they do that if they weren't suspects? Why would they not talk to the police for months on end if they didn't think of themselves as suspects or didn't think that the police thought that they were suspects? It's also fascinating how Patsy pounces on specific words used, saying, she says, we've been said to be under the umbrella of suspicion. So here you have a journalism major, acutely aware of language, someone who knows words, knows about turns of phrase, also someone suspected by some to be the writer of the ransom note, arguing about words and what words mean, and saying, were we ever technically suspects? Being under the umbrella of suspicion, is that the same as being a suspect? Right? And I'm not sure how you can end up having a grand jury vote to indict, not once but 4 indictments, without ever becoming a suspect. Anyway, let's go on to number 4. What else did the Ramseys lose or could they have lost? And I think that's quite an interesting question. Do you think you can answer it before we put it into more context? What else did the Ramseys lose or could they have lost? And so at 2 minutes 32 in this segment, Larry asks what it was like being regarded as suspects. And John then expands on what Patsy had just said, and he makes this surprising comment.
It's a no-win?
Well, we lost our daughter. That's the worst possible thing that could have happened to us. Anything that has happened in the aftermath pales by comparison.
Now, I can't help wondering, what is John really thinking? And you might say, well, the way they were mistreated by the police, that pales in comparison. Is that what he's really thinking? What else could he really be thinking about here? He's talking about losing their daughter and then something else could happen to them, but that pales by comparison. Think about just the whole scenario that is being thought about. That did the Ramseys, were they confronted with a situation, they just lost their daughter, and then someone wrote a ransom note, and something was going to happen that wouldn't pale by comparison, which is why perhaps somebody felt that they had to do something. And has anyone been able to ask that question and then also make any attempt to answer it? So if you think about the situation inside the crime scene, and again, this is in the hypothetical where an intruder wasn't involved, just a thought experiment, then you say, the Ramseys have just lost their daughter. What else needs to be protected here? What else could be lost here? Any thoughts? Have you ever thought about that question? And then number 5, and this is pretty fascinating. Larry says, It's December 26th, the day after Christmas. That's when this occurred, right? Is Larry right? Is Larry right when he says, is the day after Christmas when the incident occurred? Let's listen to how he says it and how John responds.
Back to that night. It's December 26th, the day after Christmas, right? That's when this occurred.
Fucking A.
Oh, hold on 1 second.
We were dealing with John recently in a different interview when he also answered, Can you remember what it was about? Anyway, look at JONBENET's gravestone. What do you notice? Look closely. Look carefully. 16 years after appearing on Larry King, John was interviewed by Dr. Phil, and Dr. Phil asked John specifically about this.
The date you put on the tombstone was what?
December 25th. 2 reasons. 1, the killer said, I'll call you tomorrow. I presumed he wrote the note the night of the 25th.
Now, we've already established in previous analysis that when the killer didn't call between 8 and 10, John didn't say anything. John says something in his book, and John says something here. But in the real-time scenario of the crime and the crime scene, within the fabric of that crime scene, when that period of time passed, nobody said anything. John didn't say anything. Patsy didn't say anything. And it does seem like he knew what was in the note, even though he said he knows about this written in the note, but he doesn't seem to say otherwise much of the details that he was aware of in the note. But he's very aware of this detail, the timing. And bear in mind, this is a question about how did John know when JONBENET died, and also when on Larry King he says, all of this happened on the day after Christmas, didn't it? And John says, What is the second reason that they put December 25th on the tombstone? What's the second reason John says they put December 25th on the tombstone?
Are you sure you want to hear this?
And secondly, I didn't want people ever to forget that JONBENET was murdered on Christmas.
Let's go back to that night. It's December 26th, the day after Christmas, right? That's when this occurred.
Anyway, that's 5 tricksy moments, and although I said the first 5 minutes, it's actually in the first 3 minutes. How do you think on a score of 1 to 5, 5 being a good and perfect score, 1 being a fail, did the Ramseys do during the first 2 or 3 minutes of the interview on Larry King? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.